Thomas was a man who carried the weight of countless failures on his shoulders. His small workshop, tucked away at the end of a quiet street, was cluttered with broken pieces of metal, scattered sketches, and tools that had grown dull from overuse. Each invention he attempted seemed to collapse under the pressure of his dreams. The people of the town whispered about him as they passed by, calling him foolish for wasting years on ideas that never worked. Children laughed when they saw smoke rising from his shed, and neighbors shook their heads, convinced he had no future. But inside, Thomas held a stubborn fire. He believed there was something waiting to be created, something that would finally work if he just kept trying. Yet with every failure, that fire flickered. Nights grew longer as he sat by his lamp, staring at broken contraptions that had failed once again. His hands trembled with exhaustion, and his heart carried a heavy doubt. Was he destined to fail forever? There were moments when the silence of the night felt unbearable, when the walls of his workshop echoed back his own questions. He thought about the people who had already given up on him, the ones who saw him as a man chasing shadows. Each failure felt like proof that they were right. He wondered if he was simply too stubborn to admit defeat. Still, he rose every morning, pulling himself back into the cycle of trial and error. It wasn't hope that pushed him anymore, it was something quieter, something he couldn't name. Perhaps it was the refusal to let failure be the final word. Perhaps it was the dream that one day, one attempt might just stand where so many others had fallen. And yet, the failures piled higher. Tools broke in his hands, materials bent the wrong way, and designs that seemed brilliant on paper fell apart in reality. His heart carried the sting of disappointment more times than he could count. His neighbors laughed, but Thomas felt no anger toward them. He understood their doubt, because he carried the same doubt in himself. Still, he stayed in that small workshop, night after night. The air smelled of burnt metal and frustration, and the floor was littered with scraps of failure. But somewhere beneath all of that, a quiet strength began to form. Thomas didn't see it yet, but each broken attempt was shaping him in ways success never could. One evening, when Thomas sat slumped at his workbench with his head resting heavily on his arms, a gentle knock echoed at the door of his workshop. He opened it to find Mr. Harris, the elderly craftsman who lived across the street. The old man had watched Thomas for years, seen the smoke, the sparks, and the endless stream of failed attempts. Unlike the others in town, Harris never mocked him. Instead, his eyes carried a softness that seemed to say he understood. The old man stepped inside, glancing at the scattered pieces of unfinished inventions. His hands traced the outlines of Thomas's discarded work, not with criticism but with quiet respect. Then, he spoke in a low voice that seemed to steady the air. He told Thomas that failure was not a dead end, but a teacher. Every broken piece in that room was a page in the book of learning. Every mistake was a step on a path that led forward, even if it didn't feel that way. Thomas listened, though his heart was heavy. He confessed his doubts, how he had tried 100 times, how nothing seemed to work, how the laughter of the townspeople had sunk deep into his bones. Harris nodded, not dismissing his pain, but acknowledging it. He shared his own story, of how he too had once chased ideas that fell apart in his hands. He spoke of how those failures, though painful, had shaped the skills that later built his success. The words did not erase Thomas's struggle, but they planted a seed. For the first time in months, he looked at the broken inventions not only as proof of defeat, but as reminders that he was still trying. Harris reminded him that the difference between those who fail and those who succeed is often just one more attempt, one more refusal to quit. The old man left him with a simple thought, that the world rarely remembers how many times someone falls, but it always remembers the moment they finally stand. Thomas sat long into the night with those words echoing in his mind. The failures were still there, scattered across the floor, but they no longer felt like chains. They began to feel like footsteps, marking a long road he had already walked. And in that realization, something shifted inside him. He understood that every failure he carried was not wasted, it was building the foundation for what was yet to come. The weeks that followed carried the same rhythm of trial and error, but something inside Thomas had changed. Each time his invention collapsed, he no longer saw it as the end, but as a message guiding him toward what needed to be improved. The sting of failure was still there, but it no longer broke him. He remembered Mr. Harris's words, that the world would not remember the 100 times he fell, but the one time he stood tall. Then, one late afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun filled his workshop, something remarkable happened. After weeks of adjustments and endless failed trials, his hands moved with a steadiness he had never felt before. He tightened the last bolt, stepped back, and held his breath. The small machine before him, something designed to help farmers carry heavy loads, came to life. It worked softly, moving just as he had imagined it would. Thomas watched in disbelief as it worked, not once faltering, not once breaking apart. Tears welled in his eyes. The countless nights of doubt, the ridicule, the exhaustion, they all rushed back to him in that moment, not as chains, but as proof of how far he had come. He had failed 100 times, but it was those very failures that had brought him here. Without them, this moment would never have existed. Word spread quickly through the town. At first, the neighbors came out of curiosity, expecting another broken invention, but when they saw the machine working, their laughter turned into silence, and that silence turned into respect. Farmers began using his creation, and soon Thomas's workshop, once seen as a place of foolish dreams, became a place of hope. Yet for Thomas, the greatest victory was not the invention itself. It was the realization that failure had never been his enemy. It had been his teacher, shaping his persistence, strengthening his spirit, and guiding him step by step toward this breakthrough. Standing in his workshop that evening, Thomas felt a quiet peace. He knew the road ahead would bring more failures, but he no longer feared them, for he understood now that each one was simply another step closer to something greater. And so, the man once defined by failure became a symbol of perseverance, reminding everyone that success is not built in a single moment, but in the countless struggles that pave the way to it. For those listening, the message is clear. No matter how many times you stumble, every fall carries a lesson, and every lesson brings you closer to the life you are meant to create. Failure does not define you, your persistence does. If this story touched you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need encouragement today. And if you'd like more heartfelt stories that inspire reflection and strength, consider liking, commenting, and subscribing to the channel. Together, we keep alive the spirit of perseverance.